Most people, and I include myself in that broad list, when they think about leprosy, they probably think back to the biblical times, back when lepers were cast out of polite society and forced to go live in leper colonies separated from everybody else, isolated from the rest of the world, including from their friends and family, until they would ultimately die from what was then an incurable disease. Now, that is, of course, no longer the case. Leprosy is no longer a death sentence, given the fact that modern antibiotics can cure the bacterial infection behind leprosy relatively easy. The treatment can be given with relative ease, and it's not even expensive. In most parts of the world, the antibiotics themselves are given out for free to the patients. But still, every single year, roughly 200,000 more people globally get diagnosed with leprosy. And around 200 of those, on average, are Americans. Concerningly, though, in the last decade here in the US, that number has been spiking in certain geographical locations, particularly in the state of Florida, where they had a doubling in the number of cases reported every single year. And this uptick appears to not be caused by what you might imagine it to be caused by. In fact, cases are suddenly popping up with no known links to traditional causes of leprosy transmission. And so today, let's go through why this spike might be occurring, as well as more technical things like what leprosy actually is, as well as how you can prevent contracting it as it's growing here in the US. And before we dive in, please do smash those like and subscribe buttons so this video can reach ever more people via the YouTube algorithm so that they can know what leprosy is, how to avoid it, and why it might be spiking here in the US and potentially becoming endemic. So let's dive in. Now, to start with, leprosy, also known as Hansen's disease, is caused by a bacterial germ called Mycobacterium leprae. The disease caused by this bacteria, it affects the skin, it affects the upper respiratory tract, the eyes, as well as the peripheral nervous system, the nerves that go from the spine to the rest of the body. And in some cases, people who are infected, they can have their extremities lose their sense of both touch as well as pain. And so a leper might step on glass or they might burn their hand and not even feel it, which can lead to serious infection. And if left untreated, leprosy, it can paralyze the hands as well as the feet. It can cause blindness, and it can cause the fingers and the toes to shorten, leaving the hands and feet basically as nubs. And as a side note, I always thought that it actually caused the toes and the fingers to fall off if you have leprosy. But in doing research for today's episode, I learned that it doesn't. Instead, it forces the body to go through this process where the bones break down and slowly get reabsorbed into the body. And because the peripheral nerves are damaged, the person might not even feel it happening until it's too late and their fingers become shorter and shorter and shorter. Maybe until it gets too late, and even if they get that antibacterial drug, they're left with nubs for hands. Other symptoms of leprosy, they can include patches of skin that are different in color from the rest of the body, and those patches also lose their sense of feeling. Eventually, the nerve damage develops into muscle weakness and then full-out paralysis in both the hands as well as the feet. And all in all, obviously, it's a terrible disease that destroys your life. The bright side, though, is twofold. Firstly, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, the treatment is simple, low cost, and it's also fairly easy to diagnose leprosy early enough to stop it from developing further. You simply run some diagnostic tests, like you take a skin biopsy and you look for the leprosy-causing bacteria under the microscope, and if you find it, you administer the antibiotics, and that's pretty much it. So that's the first bright side. It's easy to diagnose, and it's easy as well as cheap to treat. The second bright side is that contrary to popular opinion, leprosy is not actually highly contagious. According to U.S. Health and Human Services, around 95% of the human population have immune systems that are strong enough to resist the bacteria which causes leprosy, meaning it's not something that's going to spread like wildfire throughout a society. Furthermore, leprosy doesn't actually appear to spread through casual contact between humans, like shaking hands with someone or hugging them or even sharing meals with them or sitting next to each other. The most widely accepted route of transmission seems to involve very prolonged, very close person-to-person contact with an infected individual, and the transmission will likely come through the respiratory droplets, basically from a cough or a sneeze, and that gets into your mouth, your nose, or your eyes. And the reason that I have to use words like likely as well as probably when talking about leprosy transmission is that despite this disease being quite literally around since the time of the Bible, since biblical times, the exact transmission of leprosy is still not fully understood by the scientists who study it. And part of the reason it's not well understood has to do with the fact that the bacteria which causes leprosy is very slow to grow. It regularly takes upwards of 4 to 5 years between the point of infection and when you get the first symptoms of leprosy appearing. Sometimes actually it takes upwards of 20 years for that to happen. And so given that delay, you can see the obvious challenge of trying to track the source of leprosy in an infected individual. Someone can suddenly start getting splotches on their skin or weakness in their peripheral nerves, and then you have to ask that person, hey, have you been in contact with anyone who might have had the leprosy bacteria on them within the span of the last 20 years? And if so, what kind of contact did you have? It's almost an impossible question to answer, and so tracking the actual transmission of the disease becomes very difficult. And that's on top of the fact that since most doctors will never even see a case of leprosy in their practice lifetimes, it's often misdiagnosed. But again, it almost doesn't matter because the upside is that it is easy and completely treatable. You simply take a 3-in-1 multi-drug, and within 72 hours, the infection is gone. And it's worth mentioning, since the year 1995, the World Health Organization has been supplying this multi-drug free of cost to the end user to all countries where leprosy is endemic. And unfortunately, that topic of where leprosy is endemic brings us neatly back to the state of Florida. All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. If you've watched our program, Facts Matter, then you know that we focus on one thing, which is the facts. Not speculation, not narratives, just what the data shows. And right now, the data globally is pointing in a direction people should really be paying attention to, which is the fact that global conflicts are fueling market uncertainty. That's why I believe in owning something real, something physical, something that the government can't just inflate away, which is physical gold and physical silver from today's sponsor, which is American Hartford Gold, the company that I trust and who I've been personally buying from for many years now. These are tangible assets. They're not tied to policy decisions or shifting narratives. Gold has held its value for thousands of years through inflation, currency changes, the rise and fall of empires, as well as general global instability. In a certain sense, gold actually thrives in periods of global instability. And American Hartford Gold is a good company. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, thousands of 5-star reviews. They can deliver your gold and your silver directly to your doorstep, or they can help you set up a gold IRA if you're trying to diversify your retirement. And right now, when you call and mention my name, Roman, you can get up to $20,000 in free silver with your first qualifying purchase. So give them a call, 866-242-2352, or just text Roman to 65532. That's again, 866-242-2352, or text Roman to 65532. I'll also throw all their details. You'll be able to find them down in the description box below. Up on your screen is a map from the Leprosy Mission. They use publicly available data from the WHO to show where the newest cases of leprosy are arising globally. And as you can see, most of these cases are found across Asia, Africa, as well as South America. And in particular, being marked in purple, you have the countries of Brazil, India, as well as Indonesia, which routinely report more than 10,000 new cases a year, which is obviously a lot. However, the US, which would have been marked in yellow on this map for a very long time, is now marked in orange, heading towards red, largely because of the state of Florida. Now, historically, leprosy has been fairly uncommon here in the US, peaking in the year 1983 with a total of 456 cases, before then falling sharply down to well under 100 cases by the year 2000. However, at that point, the reports showed that the number of cases reversed course and began to climb both steadily and sharply up until the year 2015, when they stabilized at around 200 cases per year, which is fine. However, an uptick in the number of cases coming out of the Southeast, particularly in Central Florida, is raising concerns about the source of the increase. If we zoom into the US data, we find that there were 159 new cases of leprosy in the US in the year 2020, with Florida accounting for roughly 1/5 of those cases. But then you zoom in further, and it was not an uptick across the entire state of Florida. Instead, it was Florida's Brevard County, which was responsible for 12% of all cases nationwide. Here is an excerpt from NBC Miami. Quote, "Since 2020, every single Florida county has seen less than 10 cases total except for Brevard and Volusia. Those counties have reported 43 and 19 cases total since 2020, respectively. For comparison, since 2020, Miami-Dade has seen a total of 5 cases, and Broward has seen 3. Also included in that same article was a visual component. They had a chart showing visually the percentage of Volusia and Brevard County compared to the rest of Florida. And so this data would seem to indicate that this uptick is not being caused by the immigration influx. I mean, you of course can't totally rule it out as a factor. I mean, we did have something upwards of, I think officially 10 million people come in when you include the gotaways into the U.S. over the course of the last 5 years. I guess 5.5 years now. And you can imagine that if they came from South America as well as Africa, Asia, and those places have a lot more cases of endemic leprosy, probably it led to an uptick. But given the fact that Miami-Dade County seems to be unaffected, while the much smaller Volusia and Brevard counties are affected, specifically Brevard County, which is the 10th most populated county in Florida. So there's only, I think, 600,000 people in that county. It would seem to indicate that something else is going on there rather than just the influx of new migrants. To that end, in 2023, you had a research letter that was published in the CDC's Emerging Infectious Diseases Journal, which found that leprosy was starting to appear to be endemic in Central Florida, meaning the people getting infected were getting that infection locally rather than from somewhere else. Quote, Florida, USA has witnessed an increased incidence of leprosy cases lacking traditional risk factors. Those trends, in addition to decreasing diagnosis in foreign-born persons, contribute to rising evidence that leprosy has become endemic in the southeastern United States. The paper also included a review of case data from the years 2015 up until 2020, and it found that 34% of new case patients appear to have acquired the disease locally, meaning they didn't travel internationally and then come back with it. They acquired it somewhere there in Central Florida. And the trend has actually continued. Florida reported more cases of leprosy in 2025 than in any other year in modern history. Records from the Florida Department of Health show 36 cases reported last year in 2025, which surpassed the previous record, which was 29 cases in 2015. And of those 36 patients reported last year, 27 of them were believed to have gotten infected locally within the state of Florida. Also, just as a reference, in terms of this year, up until August 17th, which is when we're filming this episode, Florida has already reported 19 confirmed new cases. And more of these cases appear to have something in common. One cute little animal, the unassuming armadillo. Believe it or not, you can get leprosy from contact with an armadillo because they carry the M. lepri bacteria on them. This was first confirmed back in 2011 when the New England Journal of Medicine published an article formally linking armadillos to human leprosy cases. In that study, it was found that people and armadillos, both tested, they share the exact same strain of the disease. The patients tested in that study were native-born Americans who reported no international travel as well as no prolonged proximity to someone with leprosy. However, they did live in Central Florida near armadillos. That article, it specifically recommended to not make either frequent direct contact with armadillos as well as to avoid cooking and or eating armadillo meat. And if you happen to be from Florida, leave in the comment section below if that's an actual delicacy, because I've never heard of it before. But I guess if it's a recommendation, there was enough cases of it happening that I guess people are eating armadillos down there. Let me know if you have eaten them before and what they taste like. Regardless, though, 4 years later, there was another study published in the year 2015, which tested 645 armadillos across 8 different locations in the Southeast, and it found leprosy-infected armadillos at each location, ranging from between 10 and 16% of the armadillo population. They also tested 52 human patients from that same region, and they found that the humans were infected with the same strains that were associated with the armadillos. That paper from 2015 concluded the following, quote, "The geographic range and complexity of zoonotic leprosy is expanding." Then there was another study published recently in the year 2025, and this one was published in the CDC's Emerging Infectious Diseases Journal, in which researchers looked closely at about a dozen cases of leprosy which were suspected to be locally acquired. And here's what they found. Quote, in fact, most interviewees regularly took part in outdoor activities, such as golfing and gardening, where they might have come in contact with soil or grass contaminated with armadillo urine or feces, which might have served as the route of transmission. Along that same line, that same study also revealed that local soil samples were testing positive for the bacteria as well. Quote, M. lepri can persist in free-living amoeba in soil, serving as another potential reservoir for human infection, which might explain the connection between human infections and the armadillo reservoir. However, the CDC did go on to say that the risk of getting infected through armadillos is very low, and the Florida Department of Health calls it very uncommon, which obviously makes sense. I mean, I can't imagine a lot of people either eating armadillo stew or digging in the dirt and getting infected by a strain of armadillo feces, and then that gets into you, especially when 95% of the human population can resist the bacteria anyway. Obviously, the risk is very low. However, here's the issue. 3 years ago already, the CDC issued a bulletin saying that leprosy has now become an actual endemic disease within Central Florida. Here's what they wrote back, again, back in 2023, so this was 3 years ago now. Quote, our case adds to the growing body of literature suggesting that Central Florida represents an endemic location for leprosy. An endemic location, meaning it's not just the case that now you're going to be asked, hey, did you happen to fly to Brazil or Indonesia? And then they think maybe you got it from there. It's the opposite. If somebody else in the world gets leprosy, they're going to be asked, hey, did you fly to Central Florida at any point and get leprosy there and come back? However, seeing just 36 cases in Central Florida might not seem that bad, and you can easily imagine just avoiding armadillos if you have to. But the problem here is the trend and the possibility of a larger geographical spread through ticks. You see, another possible vector for leprosy is ticks. Although right off the bat, I will mention that the scientific community is pretty short on research data in this area. But there is some stuff that you can find online. For instance, you have this study here coming out in the year 2021 and published in the Frontiers in Microbiology journal. And it assesses the potential for ticks to transmit leprosy-causing bacteria and to test if viable samples of the bacteria can be maintained in cells that are derived from ticks. And so what the researchers did here was that they intentionally infected ticks with the M. lepri bacteria, and they found that not only did the bacteria persist through multiple life cycle stages, passing the bacterial infection onto their offspring, but then they also observed horizontal transmission from infected ticks to a vertebrate host. In this case, it was a rabbit. Quote, the results of the study suggest that ticks themselves might serve as a vector for the transmission of M. lepri, and that tick cells are suitable for maintenance of viable M. lepri for an extended period of time. However, it is worth noting that this was in a lab setting, and as of now, there's no solid body of evidence showing that a person in Florida or anywhere else contracted leprosy from a tick bite. But that could also just be because very few people appear to be looking into this issue. When we were doing research for this episode, we could not find any studies looking into M. lepri, the bacteria, in ticks that were caught in the wild, in ticks that were infected with armadillos, or even any studies that are linking tick bites to leprosy. It seems to really be a blind spot in the research right now, which is a real shame because at the very same time that you have the number of leprosy cases in Central Florida increasing, you also have an increase in the geographical spread of ticks across the U.S. And if those two things are going to be connected, then what's endemic to Central Florida right now could spread to other places via the little ticks. However, that's just an idea at the moment without any hard data. The CDC currently does not identify ticks as an established human transmission route for leprosy. So take that for what it's worth. And so there you have it. We were promised flying cars by now, but instead in the year 2026, we're getting a resurgence of this biblical ancient disease in the state of Florida with a possibility of further spread. Very cool. But again, treating it is very simple. You just have to get it diagnosed early and take the antibiotics so it's not the end of the world. If you'd like to dig deeper into my research for today's episode, I'll throw all my research notes. You'll be able to find them down in the description box below if you want to dive deeper into the weeds. And all I ask in return is that if you haven't already, please do smash those like and subscribe buttons as you're making your way down there to the description box. That way the episode can be picked up by the algorithm and shared out to more people. Thank you so much for that. And then lastly, on a completely unrelated note, I've mentioned it before, but never hurts to mention it again. Over on Epic TV, we just published a phenomenal documentary called Final Hours, where we explored this new scientific field of near-death experiences. Basically, we interviewed people who were dead. Either they were clinically dead or they were brain dead for a period of time. But in either case, they came back to life, they got resuscitated, and they remembered what they had experienced on the other side. The beings that they were able to speak with, the worlds that they visited, being able to see their entire lifetime outside the constraints of time and space through the vantage point of other people in their lives. It's a fascinating body of research because it's so hard to study what happens to humans after we die. But one way to do it is to actually interview the people who died, came back, and were able to remember what they saw on the other side. Fascinating research and fascinating testimony. So whether you believe in life after death or not, these are real testimonies and real hard evidence of people who actually experienced it firsthand. So take a look. It's a phenomenal documentary, and you can access it by clicking on that link at the very top of the description box below. Just click on that link. It'll take you to Epic TV, where you can watch Final Hours for yourself right away.
Technically, I was dead, but I felt that this was more real than real, and I felt more alive than life itself.
Thousands have glimpsed something vast and loving waiting on the other side.
I was surrounded by beings. Some of them I recognize from this life.
It's more just like a light, the light of God. I was so happy. I just felt like more and more of the pain of this world was just floating away.
What do these human experiences mean for our collective soul?
The more we can come into harmony, love, and kindness, the more we're aligned with the essence of the universe.
And then, until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epic Times. Stay informed. Most importantly, stay free.